Today I'm going to talk about the different kinds of lifting gear that we use in powerlifting. And I have a feeling this might make a few people angry. I wanted to do a video that's a little bit lighter than the last few that I put out. I was talking about some pretty serious topics. So today I'm going to talk about the different equipment that we use in powerlifting. Knee sleeves, shoes, belts, wraps, wrist wraps, slingshots, all of them. First up, I'm going to start with the standard squatting knee sleeve that we use in competition. Most lifters that I know use the SBD sleeves, but there's a variety of brands out there, and typically it's a 1/4 inch thick neoprene with heavy stitching. We wear them a size too small, so they're really tight, and they do provide a 5 to 10 pound advantage for my squat. Mostly I wear them because they protect my knees. I'm 47 years old, I've had knee surgery, and it's just advisable to wear them, especially if you're going to be squatting a lot, simply because they offer protection. But they do provide an advantage. They definitely provide an advantage. Now, how much of an advantage do they provide? Well, it depends upon the weight you're squatting. So if you're doing 50% of your 1 rep max, it's a lighter weight, so you're adding more spring to a lighter weight, which means you're going to be able to crank reps out like crazy. They don't provide as much of an advantage at heavier weights, but I've noticed for me personally, I can do 5 to 10 pounds more with my sleeves on than I can without. So that brings us to knee wraps. Knee wraps provide such an advantage that it's an entirely different category of lifters in the USPA. If you're competing raw, you can use knee sleeves. If you use knee wraps, you are in a different class called classic raw. I've seen lifters, depending on how much weight they have on the bar, do up to 50 pounds, sometimes more, on their squat if they're wrapped properly. They take these really, really long wraps and they wrap them super tight around their knees. And I'm here to tell you right now that when you're in the hole, right below parallel, it provides a lot of spring. They wrap them so tight that it actually cuts circulation off, and they have to almost immediately unwrap after the lift is done because it's so painful. So yeah, you get a really, really distinct good advantage from using knee wraps over knee sleeves. I definitely recommend using one or both if you're going to squat heavy, simply because they also offer a ton of protection, and that's really the most important thing, is safety. Well, since we're talking sleeves, we might as well cover elbow sleeves. SBD also makes elbow sleeves just like their knee sleeves. How much do these help? I started using elbow sleeves recently just because I don't have heavy ones. I don't have the ones they use in competition, but mine do have these little straps on them. And I think I can get 5 pounds out of them, for me. I haven't used the SBD ones. And now, anecdotally, I've had other lifters tell me they can put, 5, 10, 15 pounds on your 1 rep max. They are not legal in competition, at least not in the USPA. I don't know all the federation rules. You can check what gear is legal for your federation by going to their webpage, and most of them have a approved gear list. So if you're going to compete, I would definitely look into checking into that. Now, wrist wraps. How much does that help? Well, I don't know. That's more for your wrist protection. I don't think they actually give you any kind of a lifting advantage. For me, I use what's called a false or a suicide grip. So I found I really don't need wrist wraps at all. I'll usually wear them anyways, just for protection. But I haven't noticed any difference if I wear them or I don't wear them for my 1 rep max. But most people, they don't use a false or suicide grip. And I think wrist wraps can be crucial, especially at really heavy weights, for keeping your wrists straight. Because if your wrist snaps back, then you risk dumping weight on you. Now, one thing I've noticed is a lot of people wear wrist wraps and they use the thumb loops to wrap them, and then they don't take the thumb loops off when they get on the platform to lift. In the USPA, it is not legal to have thumb loops on, so you have to remember to pop those before you get on the platform. Otherwise, they could red light your lift. So, what does that bring us to? Let's talk about equipped benching. We're talking Slingshots, bench shirt, multi-ply bench shirt. Scott Mendelson, one of my favorite power lifters, he was bench pressing close to 1,000 pounds with a multi-ply bench shirt. But he can do about a 600-pound bench raw. Now, these numbers are estimates. I don't know his actual numbers, but they're around there. So, that's telling me that the bench shirt that he uses gives him a 40% advantage. He can bench 40% more with a shirt than he can without it. Now, you might say, well, that's kind of cheating or whatever. Well, no, he's competing against other people that are using the same equipment, so they have the same advantages. But now think about this. Just to unrack and hold 1,000 pounds, because there's no advantage at the unrack. The advantage is off the chest. Could you even imagine holding 1,000 pounds? Like, just holding it, just getting it out of the rack. You could have a competition to see who could unrack the most weight, and I guarantee you that 99.999% of all the human males on this planet couldn't get anywhere close to 1,000 pounds. That's crazy. But, most of us use what? The Slingshot here? The red one? The black one? So, how much of an advantage does a Slingshot give you? Well, I can bench, as of my recent video, I can bench 410 pounds without a Slingshot. I did have elbow sleeves on. With a Slingshot, I was able to rep 405 for 4. I'd be willing to bet that I could get 405 for 5 with my Slingshot. So, how much of an advantage is that? Well, that's a pretty significant advantage. Now, if you're using a Slingshot at lower weights, like 50%, like if I was going to try to bench 225 pounds, holy crap, I bet I could probably, if I could raw press 225 for 25 reps, which I can do, I would be willing to bet that with a Slingshot, I could probably do it for 50. That's how much of an advantage it would give me at lower weights. At lower weights, the Slingshot gives you so much of an advantage, you have to pull the weight to you like a row. So, food for thought. I know these guys, they say, it only gives you a little tiny bit. Well, I guess that really depends on the amount of weight you're using, because as the weight goes up, the advantage that the equipment provides goes down. So, when you start getting, well above your 1 rep max, it's so heavy that there's the material is only going to provide so much resistance. So, the heavier you go, the less of an advantage that resistance becomes. So that covers single ply, multi-ply, Slingshots. Obviously, multi-ply, these custom tailored suits that are 2 inches thick and are so stretchy that the average person couldn't pull an empty barbell to their chest if they wanted to. But, like I said, how many of us could... the guy still raw benches 600 pounds, so that's crazy in itself. I think he's closer to like 650. I'd have to look his numbers up. Anywho, I digress. One of the most annoying things to talk about are lifting belts. I see these videos where they're like, I deadlift 500 pounds with no belt. Yeah. Like, come on. Really? A belt? Stop it. Like, that doesn't make it any more impressive in my estimation. I trained without a belt for years until, I saw someone blow their guts out with a hernia, and I was like, I should probably start wearing a belt. To me, if you know how to properly use a belt, meaning you put it on the right spot and you know how to brace your core against it, the belt basically is, in my mind, like a second set of abdominal muscles. It just keeps your core tight. And yes, if you can brace properly, you can lift more. Now, for beginners or intermediate, a belt does provide a distinct advantage because most of them haven't learned how to properly brace their core. And the problem with that is if you don't learn how to properly brace your core, the belt actually becomes a handicap, because you can't lift without it. So if you notice most of my videos, I will do all of my warm-up sets and the first or second working set without a belt. And then when I get close to like 70% of my 1 rep max, I'm putting a belt on because it's just dangerous to lift without it. I don't see the big deal about lifting without a belt. I don't think that it makes you any more impressive than a guy who does a lift with a belt, same weight. It's just, for me, it's a safety issue. At my age, if I have an injury, it could take me months before I can recover from it. So I'm not going to lift without a belt. I just think that everybody should use a belt at their 1 rep max. But you should learn how to properly brace your core. So for beginners and intermediates, I always tell them, don't use a belt yet. Learn how to brace your core properly. And then we'll start using a belt. We'll start integrating that. And then it becomes a really effective tool that can both help you lift more and keep you safe so that you can lift for a very, very long time. Alright, so that brings us to lifting shoes. Now, lifting shoes are really awesome for squatting. Any kind of Olympic weightlifting or anything where you have to put yourself in a deep squat position, lifting shoes are awesome because they increase your ankle mobility and they put yourself, in the right position so that you get your toes over your knees right. And, for a lot of guys, they can't hit depth without them. Here's what I'm going to say about lifting shoes. Lifting shoes don't work for everybody. It's been my experience that the wider your stance is, the less the shoes help. And if you go with a really wide squat, it can actually start becoming a liability because it makes it more dominant on your calf muscles. And you'll notice that you start overworking your calves really hard when you go with a really, really wide squat. So I would say go flat shoes for wide, try lifting shoes out for narrow. It might, especially if you have depth issues like I used to have, squat shoes are awesome. Now, I've noticed that a lot of people will use lifting shoes when they're deadlifting. I don't like this because that heel increases the range of motion for that lift. Even if it's just a half inch, that's still a half inch more you have to pull that bar on the platform. And it makes that lift harder. Excuse me, I had a little frog in my throat there. I don't know, lifting shoes, it's one of those things where you just got to try it out and see if it's going to work for you or not. But I would definitely recommend trying it out. Absolutely, 100%. Because if you find that it does work for you, it's going to make the squat feel 100 times better. And there's a million other little sneaky things that us YouTube lifters can do online, and I've seen guys try to do it in the gym and at meets. Things like using kinesiology tape, and wrapping your knees with that underneath your sleeves, and you're putting it on your shoulders and elbows, and all of that. Well, that'll help you, squat, bench just a couple pounds more. Things like that, I'm not going to really go into in this video. For the most part, this is the equipment that we use. Almost every lifter I know uses. And I just wanted to go into the leverages and advantages and acknowledge that it does increase the amount you're able to lift. And we should all be honest about that. Now, if any of you guys have any questions about any of the equipment that I use, or you're looking for recommendations, or you just need help with how to properly use the equipment that you spent money on, hit me up. If you guys are looking for, help with your form or technique, and you feel like I could help you out with that, I would also be open to doing video call training. Would be more than happy to set up a camera, and I could, go over your lifts. I could use my software to analyze and break down your bar path, things like that. And I'd be totally willing to do that. I don't have a whole lot of subscribers, and generally speaking, when I make these longer form videos, I maybe only get 20 or 30 views at the most. So I definitely think that I have the time to help one or two, maybe a handful of people out, and it wouldn't take long. So feel free to hit me up. I would absolutely love to help with that.